Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Competitive Enablement Show on the Compete Network, powered by Clue, the podcast for product marketers and competitive professionals looking to give their companies a competitive advantage. I'm your host, Adam McQueen, and today I was joined by Chelsea Pula, the Senior Manager of Competitive Intelligence at Amex. Ben, why should folks give this one a listen?
Because not all of our guests have a competitive landscape as complex as Chelsea does, because we're not just talking direct competitors. We're talking geolocated competitors. We're talking indirect competitors. We're talking even sort of fractional competitors. So she gives a really interesting point of view that a lot of our guests have talked about a little bit, but she really lives it day in, day out. So I think that's really great. I also particularly loved her response to ad hoc requests. You know, Adam, that's a conversation, a topic that comes up here or there. And it's a balance between saying, here, I'm here to help, but also here are the resources. And you don't want to just turn people away. So what she does is she makes sure to give sort of a good golden nugget. So someone reaches out, you say, you're right. You know, here's your answer. And here's maybe something you didn't know, but always at the end says, and here's where you can find more information. So I thought that was a really kind of novel approach, one that we haven't heard before. And it's clear that she knows what she's doing. So I know that our listeners will get something from it.
Yeah, Chelsea was awesome. Plenty of stories to share. Loved her. She drops 3 actionable takeaways for listeners. So expect that right away. Get your notebooks out. Great conversation with Chelsea. I'm sure we'll have her back. Before we get to the conversation, quick little bit of housekeeping too. On the Clue side of things, we dropped a new resource. So check out the Competitive Enablement Executive Summary template. This thing, I'm stoked on this thing. We've worked with a lot of different folks in our space, Compete Pros, and a lot of it today is how do we secure budget for Compete? How do we get revenue leadership to care about Compete? And this template not only is something that you could plug in and take and deliver to leadership, but it also walks through how you start to build this business case. Done in tandem with a lot of awesome Compete professionals based on what we've seen work, not work, all of the above. Great resource. Check it out in the show notes as well. And with that all said, let's get into our conversation with Chelsea. All right, today I am joined by Chelsea Pula, the Senior Manager of Competitive Intelligence at American Express Global Business Travel. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. One thing we like to do to kick things off on episodes is to share 3 actionable takeaways for product marketers and Compete Pros listening today. So Chelsea, could you share 3 takeaways for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the first thing is that it's really all about your network. I underestimated this early in my career. I tried to do all the research and make sure I was bringing as much value to the table on my own as possible. But what I've learned is that the more that you rely on the sales professionals and product professionals who are experts in their area, the more you can crowdsource, the better. So you don't have to know everything and really lean into that network. The second is just stay humble and stay curious. I think it's easy to want to be the expert in the room and to want to be the one that knows all the answers. But I think it's helpful if we keep an open mind because competitors surprise you, right? So I think it's good to keep that open mind and just stay curious about what's going on in the competitive landscape. And then the third thing is a little bit more tactical. I would say when you're building out your competitive deliverables, really think about your audience. The needs in sales are going to be really different from the needs in product versus the needs of your executive leadership team. So just really be mindful of that audience and always challenge yourself when you're presenting to say, so what, right? So why am I presenting this? What's the takeaway for this audience? Because that's going to be how you add value. It's not enough to just say, here's what happened. It's so much more meaningful if you can say, and this is why it matters to us, or this is why it should matter to you, or here's how you should use this information. That's really where the magic is as a competitive intel professional.
Those are 3 great takeaways, and they all kind of combine with one another in some way, shape, or form. In the context of your situation today, which I think is really, really interesting when you're running Compete as a lean team in a incredibly crowded market, I'm we're going to dive into a lot of things, but first off, I just wanted you to kind of paint a picture of just like how varied and competitive your market that you're in right now is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for the Global Business Travel Division at American Express. We're a joint venture of American Express. So we are our own company, but we used to be a department. So it's a little bit, it's an interesting culture. We're very Amex, but very much our own identity as well. But travel specifically, and I didn't really appreciate this before I joined, is a super competitive environment. In the US alone, we have 50 plus competitors, and they're all pretty viable. Some of them are successful in a very specific geography. So this could be down to this competitor does really well in Cincinnati, or this competitor does really well in Pennsylvania. We see them kind of congregating in specific areas. And then others are specifically for specific verticals. So the best example is probably oil and gas in the US. Super specific needs around travel. If you think about how different business travel is for somebody who is working on an oil rig versus somebody who's going to a sales meeting, everything from the destination to the safety and what we call duty of care, which is, your company's responsibility to keep you safe on the road. So there are agencies that specialize in that vertical as well. And then on top of that, you have your indirect competitors. So I have a ton of direct competitors, a ton of TMs, what we call travel management companies in our space that we compete with head to head. But then we also have new models coming out. So the best example, I think, is probably there's something called a reshopping software. And the way this works is if after you book a hotel or a flight, this software will run in the background and automatically look for lower prices. This is something we've built in-house, but there are companies that this is their whole bread and butter. So you have to think about, how do we compete product versus point solution? Sometimes a standalone company is going to invest more heavily just because that's their bread and butter. Versus, what we have in our existing product stack might integrate a little bit better, but thinking about, those choices as well, on the product side. So yeah, it's super complex and we're a small team and, and that's also why, I started off with my network, right? Because I have the advantage of working with a ton of people who have been in the industry for a really long time. I've only been here for about 5 years. But I'm working with people who sometimes who have been at the company for 10 or 20 years. So they have a ton of expertise and history and understanding of kind of how the competitive landscape got to where it is today. But yeah, super complicated.
No kidding. And that tapping into that institutional knowledge and then sharing it at scale sounds like one way to at least tackle one method to tackle the complexity of this market. I mean, I've heard from so many folks, listeners, and just other folks in community I've talked with about sort of how do you prioritize your competitors? How do you tackle a broad landscape? Like you mentioned, you've got your direct competitors, you've got geo-specific competitors, you've got indirect competitors, your product to point solutions that are not a typical competitor per se, but there's like one piece of like your product or service.
Sure.
So what did you do to wrap your head around the complexity of the market? What were some of the first things you did jumping in here to kind of understand the market that you're competing within and start to set your teams up for success?
Yeah. So when I first joined Amex GBT, I spent a lot of time trying to understand the customer perspective. And I did this by signing up for basically every trade publication, going to webinars that were, our target persona is what we call a travel manager. So going and learning how would I become a travel manager, right? What are the things that they care about? Reading their handbooks and their tech books. There's a great resource on a website called Business Travel News. I love Business Travel News. And they have something called a Business Travel Buyer's Handbook. So I read that cover to cover just to understand, how do you build a travel management program, right? And it's a complex world for the travel managers too. That's the way I started. I just sort of approached it the way as if I was joining as a travel manager. And then just layering that with interviewing a ton of people that I work with. I had the advantage of being new, so I could sort of, play dumb and get out there and just ask as many questions as you can, right? Again, staying coupled, staying curious. And I think, I've tried to keep that energy going where I try not to make too many assumptions. Just because it is extremely complex and I learn something new all of the time. So that's been really enjoyable. And, tapping into, we have our sales engineers that are true experts on the products. Of course, we have a product marketing team, so leaning into their expertise on their specific product areas and what they knew about the competitive landscape. So yeah, that was how I started to try to absorb really as much information as possible. And then what I decided to do at some point, so it's been challenging, right? I just want to talk about like prioritization. So I think it's easy to focus on one or two top competitors, and maybe in your space, if you're listening, you might have one or two competitors that are really your focus area. But I think that the advantage we had is that we always focus on a lot of competitors. And that stopped us from having the blinders on, right? So it's easy if you're obsessed with, your next biggest competitor or who you think is the market leader. I think it's easy to be caught off guard by other competitors. And we've had, I talked about some of these like regional agencies, even though some of them are quite small and local, they still invest and produce some really amazing technology. So we've seen, we've had people catch us off guard. So we try to make sure that we're focused on as many different competitors as possible and that we don't sort of benchmark one or two. We always have at least 6 that we look at for any benchmarking exercise just to keep things comprehensive. And then the other way we look at it is we started to group competitors by type. So we looked at, what is a regional competitor versus some of the new disruptors versus some of the competitors that are more similar to us that are truly global. And so we started to break down competitors in the categories so that we could start to build sales materials for those categories instead of trying to build materials for each and every competitor because it's not feasible. So that's how we kind of tackled it.
There's some really interesting things. I think the first thing I heard from you about this, again, like when you tackle a super complex market with lots of different competitors, is go talk to as many people as possible. Shout out to Tracy Berry. Her 30 and 30 interviews, always love that as like a playbook to start. If you're in compete, 30 key stakeholder, 30-minute interviews, get them on the books. Do exactly that. It sounds like that's something you did there, Chelsea. And then you mentioned sort of a good thing on your side, on the Amex side, is that you weren't just hyper focused on one or two, especially when you're in a big market, that there was an awareness of all the different players and the potential market share that they could eat into. Again, it's funny, you're lighting many things up in my brain right now. I was listening to actually a call the other day of a CRO at enterprise company, and they mentioned like one of the biggest pains we had was that we did not care about those tertiary ankle biter competitors, especially when you're at the enterprise level. It's easy to dismiss. And then it was, oh, we've lost the deal. Oh, we've lost the deal. Oh, market share. And next thing you know, it's $60 million gone. And it's such an interesting thing. I think especially when you're at when you're in such a large market at a big company like you are, that there's just a litany of different potential alternatives out there. So when you think about it, you mentioned sort of starting to bucket them a little bit more and like group them so you're not having to tackle everything one by one. What's sort of the process there, and how do you begin to try and differentiate from those groups or buckets that you put together?
Yeah, so the advantage that we have is that because we're such a global and comprehensive player, that usually we have an answer. So our offer is highly configurable. We usually have either a direct solution answer, or if we don't have a direct solution, we might have a partner. But I really start to think about it in sort of going back to what the customer's key needs are, and then how do we solve them versus how does the competitor solve them. So I mentioned before that reshopping tool. In some cases, what you're really solving for there is savings. So what you have to take it back to is if we didn't have a reshopping solution, right? What are the other ways that we can save customers money? We can negotiate great rates on content. Maybe we can make a claim that our content is better than the competitor that they're looking at. We also could potentially add on services where we could help the customer negotiate directly with airlines so that they have their own negotiated rates. Like there's a lot of ways that we could help our customers save money. So I think if you take it back to, instead of thinking about, oh, they have a feature that we don't have, right? They have free shopping and maybe, we do have it, but if we didn't, right? Then you have to think, okay, well, we're really solving for savings, and what are the other ways that we could do that? And how can we make a really exciting story that's backed by actual fact? Savings are great because you can start to say, we could save you up to 15%, or we could save you 30% on hotels, right? You can start to back it up with numbers. And I think, it's both about making that claim. What can we do for you to solve this problem? Why do we think we can do it better? And then here's the proof, right? The proof is so critical. I think it's easy to just get wrapped up in sort of the headline sales and marketing speak. But ultimately, if you don't have any stats or either case studies or experts to back up what you're saying, then it's not really helpful.
So you mentioned that. What I loved is that, one, like don't just like compete on features like, oh, we don't have this, they have this, but you kind of reframed something you said right at the top. There was like, what is the problem they're trying to solve? And you're like, it's savings. So it feels to me like you're understanding like customer problem, like what is the thing they're trying to solve, and that's how we're going to bake in how we differentiate within a deal cycle. I love that. And what I'm curious about is, how do you get alignment on understanding, because you're as someone that's building, kind of helping build out this collateral, building out like, this is how we differentiate in the space. How does that trickle down to teams out in the field as well? Do they follow the same, like, is it like a process, like we're trying to uncover these types of pains, and when you see these pains leading to these differentiators, how do you make sure that what your process is aligns with what they're doing in the field?
Yeah, so we did shift our sales teams in the past year or I guess it's been the past few years, toward more needs-based selling as opposed to product and feature selling. So I had the benefit of the organization is really behind this approach, because we fundamentally believe that if you sell customers what they need, then they're willing to buy from you, right? So simple, but I think it's easy to get wrapped up in product and features and talking about, we joke that it's easy enough to tell somebody that your car, has a great engine and that it takes diesel fuel and everything, but that doesn't really mean anything. It's more about like, how many miles does it go? And, is it safe for me and my family? So thinking about the benefits as opposed to just the behind the scenes mechanics of whatever you're selling. What we do is we have sort of a playbook for different competitor types. So I talked a little bit about some of those regional players. I think that a lot of them, what they focus on is service. So they're really, really fantastic at providing that, what we would call like white glove, high touch service. So in that area, the playbook is tech, because we've invested a lot in our own technology. So if we're going up against a service focused competitor, shift the conversation to talk about why technology is actually central to a great travel program. And then on the flip side, if it's a tech competitor, if it's somebody who has really amazing tech, they probably aren't as focused on the traditional service of the white glove VIP. We offer that as well, so we can shift the story when we're going up against a techie competitor to say, yes, we can still match the great technology that they offer, but what really matters is when your travelers are stuck on the road and they need somebody to help them get home, right? So that's what we think is the most critical to solve for your program, and that's what we think, we can offer you better. The challenge, I think, sometimes with our sales teams is that we're really going after, there's a lot of different competitors in the deal, and you don't always know who the competitors are. So we have, our standard differentiators, and our core value story, and then it's really up to the salesperson to listen for what questions the customer might be asking that might indicate what kind of competitor they're looking at or what kind of program they're looking for. What's been interesting as well is that sometimes I think we make assumptions about customers. So we had an existing customer who had hired us to do sort of the white glove high touch service. And their account manager came to me and said, they're looking at this techie competitor that's really slick and, they're really excited about them. And I said, that's great. But if they're on white glove service, why would they want the tech competitor? And the person sort of took a step back and was like, I don't know, right? Like, you're telling me that they need white glove service, they need VIP, they need all this stuff, but they want to switch to a competitor that doesn't offer any of that. So either the customer is confused, and that happens, obviously. Like, people get excited about one part, they don't think about what they might be missing out on, or we don't really understand the customer. So I think understanding the customer is just so critical. And unfortunately, as a compete person, there's only so much you can do. Like, you have to kind of rely on what people are telling you. So typically, that's how I tackle it. I sort of have a playbook based on what kind of competitor we're looking at, what kind of customer, what their needs are. And I'll lean on the salespeople to really understand all of that.
What I'm hearing from you that I think is critical is alignment again with the revenue teams in the field, so that one, it's going to land with them. And I think we'll get to this in a little bit, sort of like, how do you make sure that the work you're doing actually gets used, the differentiators you're building are actually getting used by revenue teams. And it feels that alignment by, I think you mentioned like solution or pain-based selling is what we want to do as a full organization. So not only, sales team are going to work in that way, which means that compete in competitive research and all of the collateral you build is also going that way, which just makes it a much tighter fit. Plus, I guess some of the things you mentioned off the top as well, that you're building these relationships, you're being visible, you're talking to these folks, and you're crowdsourcing what they know. Let's jump right to that then, because this is a age-old question. We had a session, we had a live CE live session a week, 2 weeks ago now. I can't remember. Also, when this releases is probably 3 weeks ago.
Sure.
We're breaking the fourth wall here, people. But folks in attendance said like one of their biggest struggles is with the battle cards is just low usage. So I'd love to know, as we've talked about sort of how you're building these bigger, like your differentiators, how you compete across all these different spaces. What are some tactical ways that you've ensured that sellers, revenue teams are using the collateral at their disposal?
Sure. So we do have a centralized competitive intelligence library where we store all of our battle cards, and we have it available through single sign-on, so anyone has access to it, which is great. But I think that you have to think about battle cards as being almost like a level 1 deliverable. It's a necessity for your program to function, but it's not in and of itself enough to run a compete program. So we think of them as being sort of the backbone to a lot other activities that we do. Once a quarter, we have a session called Eye on the Competition, where we invite sales to come and discuss what they're hearing about the competitive landscape. And we use those as an opportunity to really get the word out around compete. Those are really well attended. We get about, I think, 30 to 40% of our commercial organization on the calls at any given time, which is awesome. Really, really great turnout, and people consistently give us positive feedback on that. So those sessions are really well attended, and I think that if you have sessions like that, or if you have any kind of hands-on sessions with sales, that's your opportunity to plug what you've offered, right? So we always start with, here's what's in the library for you to find. Here are the takeaways, and then also anything you tell us, we're going to filter, put back into the library for everyone else. So making sure that sales feels like they're part of that process as well, I think is super critical. I think the second thing is if you can get leader buy-in. So it's one thing to get the word out person by person, but if you can get on a team call, if you can get the sales managers to care about this deliverable that you've created, and then just really outlining, like, here's how we think this can benefit you, right? I feel like it's pretty intuitive. Like, it's a great competitive resource. This is going to help you sell competitively. But a lot of people just want to know, like, when am I supposed to use this? Do I have to use it? What's sort of the expectation here? How often should I be looking at it, right? So I think setting all those expectations and getting the sales managers or directors bought into it and having sort of that top-down approach can help as well. And then I think the last thing is just, again, networking. I think I always think about the give and take, right? So I want my salespeople to be sending in competitive info, but I also want to be pushing competitive info out. So anytime I have an open conversation with a salesperson, if they're asking me for something, I try to give them something special, but then I also point them back to the resources that we have. So, if they ask me for how do I compete against X competitor, that's my opportunity to impress them and say, hey, here's all the ways I think it can help you. But in the future, here's this great library that you can reference. And if you have feedback or if you want me to add more competitors or anything like that, just let me know and I'm happy to do that, right? So I always try to take sort of that servant type mindset of like, I'm a resource to the organization, so how can I help and maximize that relationship?
I love that. It's another callback that I'm thinking about, especially on this leadership buy-in. One thing, actually, our Compete Week event in December, Matt Coblentz had a session around sort of many different ways that you can use like automation and get buy-in. And he mentions the exact same thing. Like, yes, you need revenue leadership buy-in, you need sales leadership buy-in, you need them also beating the drum from a top-down perspective. And one of the cool things that he did is he set up with his sales leader like an automated follow-up when a rep closed a deal. I usually close one because they're more inclined to speak, and it would be an automated email from the sales leader when in their Salesforce opportunity said like won against competitor X. The sales leader would send an email automated to him saying, hey, congrats on winning against this competitor. Can you share some of the things that help you win the deal? And boom, intel flying in because it was coming from that sales leader perspective, and reps want to, that's who they report to. And so I was just thinking, as you mentioned, as just like a really cool hack, for lack of a better word, but really taking that next step with having sales leaders be involved in the process.
We actually did something, it just reminded me, last year we had a contest for whoever submitted the most intelligence in the quarter would get a prize. So it was a similar thing where we ran like a promotion with all of our mid-market sales team to say, and that was only possible because the leader bought into getting people into the tool and then said, let's have a contest, let's get people excited. Salespeople are already competitive with each other. So, we would send out leaderboards and get people excited about, who submitted the most tips in the quarter. So that was really fun. So similar kind of approach.
I love that, the gamification. I want to go back a little bit before, just to close out here. Because we were talking about, again, broad market you're in. You sort of like, how do you tackle them how do you tackle how you compete against each at kind of like a broader level? But you also mentioned like you're a small team. So how do you decide of all of these competitors, like who gets your attention and when?
Yeah, it's a great point. So we do look at win-loss data, and I think that's the obvious answer, right? Look at who is taking your business and where. So that helps us narrow our focus a bit. We will always look at minimum, like I said, 6 competitors in benchmarking, but we prioritize those 6 based on who are the biggest, and we'll look at that at a country level as well. So our biggest competitors in the US are not the same as the biggest in Australia. And then we'll prioritize based on how big each country is as well. So, the US is a huge market. Just for travel in general, business travel, it's huge in the United States. I think mostly because we're so regional, so it's easy for us to move around the country versus, international most of the world. But yeah, so I think prioritizing based on that. And then also sometimes I'll prioritize based on where there's buy-in, right? If at one point the Australia sales team was the most involved in the competitive intelligence program, so they got the most attention, right? Like if they're going to show up to all of my calls and they provide intelligence and they're really actively participating and raising their hands and saying, we need this, then of course I'm just going to spend more time on Australia than I do on other countries. That was a few years ago. It's not really the case these days. It's a little bit more even, which is great. So I think prioritizing that way, and then again, like thinking about those categories helped me provide a lot at scale so that I didn't have to have detailed answers about each and every competitor. And so then that way, even as new competitors enter our space, because we have a bit of a playbook based on what type of competitor and what things they're offering and what problems they're solving, what are they offering, and what are the key features. It makes it easy to rinse and repeat. It's almost like we can make our own salad, like, oh, we need lettuce for this competitor, we need tomatoes, right? Like, just pick the ingredients that you need and throw it together, and then here you go.
I love that. It's it's the most efficient way possible with resources, headcount that you have available, and just sheer number of competitors across the space. Chelsea, are you ready for producer Ben's favorite segment to close out the show?
Sure.
This is rapid fire.
Okay.
And disclaimer to listeners, you all know I also don't see these questions. Chelsea and I, neither of us see these questions until I'm looking at them right now on my screen. So if we say anything that gets myself in trouble, Chelsea in trouble, direct all your complaints to Ben at producerben@clue.com.
Perfect.
All right, Chelsea, first one's first. You went to school at St. Andrews in Scotland. Do you get to golf or visit the famous St. Andrews course?
I've been back once. I studied abroad there for a year and absolutely loved it, but I never played golf when I was there. I was spending more time playing ultimate frisbee actually with the team there. So that was my claim to fame when I was at St. Andrews. I love ultimate frisbee. It's super fun.
Oh, you're after our director of data operations is the biggest ultimate frisbee fan ever. I'm a frisbee golf guy.
I love frisbee golf too, but I'm not as good at it.
Me neither, but I still got out there.
Yeah.
You also went to Columbia and wrote for the school newspaper. What was your favorite story you wrote when you were there?
My favorite story was one where I don't remember the name of the institution anymore, but I was vegan at the time and I found a vegetarian cooking program. So I went and got to meet with the head of the program and learn a ton about the way their classes work and how people get through the program, because there's not most cooking programs are really geared around meat and meat production. So it was really cool because it's New York, so there's a ton of vegetarian food. And it was really interesting because there's a lot of different kinds of cuisine that go into I love cooking, clearly. So that was probably the most fun I had writing an article when I was there.
Give our listeners a book recommendation. Personal, professional, any of the above.
Sure. So I've lately been reading It's Not TV about HBO and the history of the company. It's super interesting, lots of drama. And they surprised me. They were really startup-ish for a long time. They were very scrappy and really challenging the status quo around television. And now they're known for great programming. For a long time, that's not what they were known for. So it's been really interesting.
That's Ben's favorite book.
Really?
I know that he's like nodding his head right now in the background. He is obsessed with that book. So
oh my God, that's amazing. We didn't coordinate that.
Last question here to wrap it up. If you had a magic wand you could wave at work right now, what would you use it for?
I would use it to go to Colorado and visit my cousin and work from there. I've been meaning to get back out to Colorado. It's just so beautiful there. I love the mountains and the hiking and everything like that. So if I could blink and be in Colorado and working there, I don't know if that's what you meant, but I meant one. But that's what I would do.
I agree with that too. I want to be in Colorado. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome. We tackled everything. Where can people connect with you, reach out with you, pick your brain?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My last name is Pula, Pula. I have the benefit of being from a very small family, so I'm pretty easy to find online. But yeah, reach out to me, and I'll be at Skip if anybody's going to be there. If this comes out before Skip. So I'll see you there, hopefully.
I'll see you there, Chelsea. So it's going to be fun.
Excellent. Awesome. That's going to be fun. I'm really excited. I've never been, so.
And it's Scottsdale, so.
Yes.
Get some UV rays.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Chelsea, and we'll catch everyone next week.